Good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Wallace. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of United Against Nuclear Iran. This is our webinar on the United States and Iran after the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan. And it's my real pleasure to host everyone. I want to thank our UANI team who have put together this webinar across countries and time zones and the like, which is no easy feat. And I want to thank everyone that has joined to view this webinar. We created United Against Nuclear Iran well over a decade ago now. It's actually well over a decade. And our goal was to economically and diplomatically isolate Iran using various different programs and to use our experience to get the best experts and have the best expertise and learn from all the programs that we employ to give the best analysis on Iran. And I guess because we've been operating so long, we have achieved that status. And the best way I know of achieving that status is because we have such an incredible array of experts that are on this webinar. They're all my friends. I'm very proud and to call them all my friends. Really a distinguished group of friends. And you know, in this community, every one of the voices on this webinar, people turn to for their advice, their counsel, their analysis on this subject matter. To have them all together, I think is really special. I'll introduce them all individually, and we'll have Q&A afterwards. I'm going to read what my team has given me because I want to make sure I get the housekeeping rules right. Otherwise, I'll get in trouble. All right, so a few housekeeping points. The webinar is being recorded. Microphones, cameras, and the chat function are disabled for attendees. After remarks from our speakers, we will have a Q&A segment, which will not be recorded. It is under the Chatham House rules. Attendees can use the Zoom Q&A function to submit questions. Please name a specific speaker to whom the question is directed. I'll try to summarize and pose the questions to the speakers as best as I can. Questions submitted prior to the event have also been queued and will be answered as well. I hope if we have enough time to get to everyone. And now I'm going to turn the webinar and the interwebs over to a dear friend of mine, Senator Joseph Lieberman. And I do want to say one thing about the senator. I urge everyone to read, you know, we've all, amongst our team, we call him the senator. It is not because we think less of the other senators and the others that have served, but he is such an elegant, gracious, wise man. And he, if you read his, I guess it was New York Times, on the high holidays about civility in policy and being civil to one another in policy discourse, it's something that is so missing in today's political dialogue. And he's a man from another era in some ways, but he's a man that should transcend eras. And that's really all I could say about what I view as one of the great men in American policy. Senator, you're on deck.
Hey, Mark, thanks very much for that characteristically generous introduction. I must say, because my friends at the Wall Street Journal are now getting on the phone to call me, that it was printed in the Wall Street Journal.
Sorry about that.
Publication they don't want to be confused with, it's the New York Times.
Right. So I amend that.
No, you're very kind. Thanks to you, Mark, because you have been from the beginning the driving force in United Against Nuclear Iran, UANI, founded by you and Richard Holbrooke, the late Richard Holbrooke, Dennis Ross. From the beginning was particularly bipartisan to the extent of being nonpartisan, which was very important, and had a singular focus, which you've described. And I'll say very briefly, to not allow this radical extremist anti-American regime, anti-American allies regime that had taken hold of Iran, a great country, to become the regional power, and two, of course, a nuclear power. And this organization has pursued this goal with a single-mindedness for the last 13 years. Well, I think great effect. There have been ups and downs, as there always are. We have been affected as an organization by changes of leadership in Iran and in the United States, and by changes in the geopolitical reality in which we live. And that is particularly true today. It's been really an honor for me to serve as chairman of this organization and to work with you for the last, I guess it's almost 6 or 7 years now. And in that time, we've seen some changes from President Obama, who advocated and fought for the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear agreement of 2015, which we at UANI opposed because we thought it was giving away the economic sanctions that we and others had fought for Congress to adopt that had been hurting Iran, and giving them away at a very small price without really any hope of stopping Iran's nuclear program. Then came President Trump, much to our surprise, withdrew America from that bad agreement. And we were hopeful again. And now we have President Biden, who's working hard to negotiate our way back into the agreement. And of course, leaders have changed. Not only has the president of the United States changed every 4 or 8 years over the time UANI has been in existence, but the leadership of Iran has changed. And if anything, it seems to have grown more anti-American, more extreme, more terrorist than ever before. With the recent election of Ibrahim Raisi, really the selection of Raisi by the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, that we have the most extreme leader, in my opinion, other than the supreme leaders that Iran has had since the Islamic Republic of Iran began in 1979. Virulently anti-American, bragging about his role in the murder by the state of as many as 30,000 Iranians for no reason other than they opposed the government, really murders for reasons that were totally political. So he confronts us with a new reality, which certainly challenges the Biden administration in its desire to renegotiate the JCPOA. I mean, how can one reasonably trust a government led by Raisi? I personally don't believe one can. I think thinking one can is irresponsible and ultimately dangerous for our country. So the changes have come and gone, but UANI has consistently, with creativity, imagination, persistence, and a kind of policy of aggressiveness, really had a very positive impact on the adoption of economic sanctions, on the guaranteeing from a private sector point of view that businesses comply with those sanctions. In recent months, I'm very proud of the work that UANI has done to show the increasingly significant economic relationship between China and Iran, in which China is covertly acquiring large quantities of Iranian fuel, which of course helps Iran counteract the impact of sanctions on them. Now comes the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, which is the result of the United States withdrawal and end of our counterterrorism center there in Afghanistan. And the topic of today's panel discussion, with a panel that is extraordinary in its experience and intellect, really, and I would say common sense and wisdom, obviously affects our goal of making sure that Iran doesn't become a nuclear power. I can't think of anything good that comes for the United States relationship with Iran as a result of the Taliban being in charge of Afghanistan now. It represents a serious defeat in our war against Islamist extremism and terrorism, which in many ways began with the Iranian Revolution of 1979. It also represents an encouragement to Iran as what I believe is still a state run by terrorists. And it has now allies, if you will, and shared interests and goals. They've had their squabbles in the past, Taliban and Iran, but the enemy of their enemies, their friends and allies on that basis with one another. So I assume and I hope that the panelists will consider the impact of the Taliban takeover on the relations between the US and Iran. I fear that the Taliban takeover will embolden Iran to feel that it can be even less forthcoming in the negotiations with the US and even more demanding. And I also fear, and I'll come back to this, that the Biden administration will nonetheless be prepared to stretch and stretch and stretch to renegotiate another agreement. The impact of the Taliban takeover on the world's geopolitical scene is significant, particularly in the region. What will our allies in the Arab world and in Israel think about the way in which we withdrew from Afghanistan? Will they think that they no longer can rely on us 100%? I was so struck after the US, UK, Australian agreement about nuclear submarines, which I thought was really excellent and a great initiative by all three leaders and countries, that the commentary about it coming from Australia and somewhat from the United Kingdom was whether the promise of the United States could be trusted to stick with Australia, which was really putting its security on the line in this deepening of alliance with the US. And I worry that those questions are going to be raised more and more after the way in which the US pulled out of Afghanistan and opened the way for the Taliban to take over. Just a final point, I may be the only expertise that I bring that is comparable and not deficient to the panelists you're about to hear is experience in American politics. So what will be the impact of the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan on the Biden administration's policy toward Iran? Well, the president has been, and I've known him for a long time, shown a side of himself that I never saw before, certainly not in the 24 years in the Senate, really defensive about the decision about Afghanistan, withdrawing our troops, and not being willing to acknowledge any mistakes, including in the evacuation, which was clearly botched. But look at the public opinion polls. The public, even people who wanted us out of Iran, believe that this was handled very badly. So one would think that the Biden administration, having suffered this defeat in the eyes of the public in a major foreign policy national security issue, would not risk another such embarrassing defeat by making a bad agreement on nuclear weapons with Iran, which is the only kind of agreement I'm convinced Iran would sign. But it is possible that there will be people in this administration who will convince the president of quite the contrary. And then I would advise him, which is that after the public loss in Afghanistan, he needs a win, and a win would be what he can get with a re-entry of Iran and the US into the JCPOA. I don't think so. And I think the consequences for us, the region and the world, are very high. The panel will deal with these questions in great detail and with expertise. They matter a lot to the security of the region, of America, and of the world. And I'm very proud that UANI is hosting this webinar alongside the UNGA, which really shows again that regardless of what changes occur in the world, what changes in leadership in the significant countries, the mission of UANI is clear, and this organization, thanks to Mark and David Ibsen and the whole team, have really stuck to it persistently, and that in a difficult time in world history, gives me a lot of hope. So thank you for allowing me to give these opening remarks. And Mark, I turn it back to you, and thank the panelists for participating, others for joining, and I look forward to listening and watching along with everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I really appreciate all of your wisdom and your kind remarks, obviously incredibly generous. I was given these bios to do these introductions to all the incredible panelists that are also my great friends, but it is somewhat the dream team. I never would have imagined after this long of operating United Against Nuclear Iran on the Counter-Extremism Project that we would have the policy equivalent, in my opinion, of really the dream team. And you'll see by these introductions and who the panelists are that it really is incredible expertise across the world on these issues. If you had to define a group of people that you could bring together, it would be, in my opinion, there are many other experts, of course, but you'll see some top-notch people. Hans Jakob Schindler is a great friend, and he is currently the senior director of the Counter-Extremism Project, so I get to work with Hans in other contexts as well. But if you had to define a civil servant and somebody that has worked in Europe and is expert on these issues, it's Hans. He was the director of the al-Qaeda Taliban Sanctions Committee at the UN. He was a senior, I think we're allowed to say this, B&D officer for many, many years, and the al-Qaeda expert before we all really even knew about al-Qaeda or we paid attention to al-Qaeda. And Hans, on top of it, was I think one of the longest serving officers at the German embassy in Tehran, and was the German officer responsible for dealing with one of the great infamous terrorist incidents inside of Iran, which was the Mykonos bombing. So Hans's experience across both Iran and across al-Qaeda is unparalleled in Europe and around the world, except for maybe some of the other people on this panel. But with that, I constantly turn to Hans's wisdom. So with that, Hans, you have the floor, and thank you for everything you've done for us and for serving your country and all of us. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciate this. As I'm the scene setter for the discussion today, I'm the only one with slides, so if you just bear with me, perfect. So thank you so much, Senator Lieberman. Mark, of course, it is a great pleasure to be with you today. I've been asked to speak about these issues that you can see here, Afghanistan and the Taliban and the terror threat and the Taliban's relationship with Iran. And I'll do so in 4 quick steps, not to overstep the time limits that I have. I will talk a little bit about how the fall of Afghanistan materialized in a couple of weeks, actually, in August. Then the really important point, the Taliban's relationship with al-Qaeda, the Taliban's relationship with Iran, and then, of course, the necessity, because we just had the first attempt of the Taliban to actually become recognized by the UN, the importance of Taliban UN Security Council sanctions and their maintenance. So now let me talk a little bit about the fall of Taliban, or the other handover, as I call it, because there wasn't really much fighting going on. You can see here a map from the BBC comparing beginning of July to the beginning of August, and it's a very gracious map, because on the 16th of August, it still affords a couple of districts to the National Resistance Front, while in fact, the Taliban are in control of any administrative structure in those districts, i.e. the valley floors, and the National Resistance Front is also confined to the valley ridges, as the Taliban were in most of Afghanistan for a very long time. So they have the ability to disrupt, but they are not a real viable opposition. Plus, in difference to the Northern Alliance, because there's of course always a discussion, is this the new Northern Alliance? Yes, the same families. Ahmad Massoud, who is famously the son of Ahmad Shah Massoud, leads the National Resistance Front, but his father had land borders where you could resupply him. His son doesn't, as you can see, totally landlocked. So very, 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 very unlikely that this, even in the medium term, could become any kind of resistance. There is already some resistance, but that's the resistance that you won't like. So this is how it happened. This is the last time the Taliban fought. The fall of Saranj in southern Afghanistan, is a big city there. Then comes Shebaran, first deal, Rashid Dostum, ardent Taliban enemy, killed without a blink of an eye over 1,000 of them in 2001 when he got to get their hands on it. So my personal thing was, whenever the Taliban are coming back, this man has a very, very low life expectancy, but they made a deal with him and he handed over Shevaran in the north, the city where he's from, plus all the weapon storages there. Next day, fall of Kunduz, neighboring city. Next day, handover of Herat, now a deal with Ismail Khan, very famously involved in trying to hunt Osama bin Laden with us. Again, a not really clear Taliban friend, but they made a deal with him, he made a deal with them. Kandahar gets handed over. Lashkar gets handed over after a lot of fighting. The forces were simply ordered to withdraw. Then 14th, next deal, Atta Mohammed Noor, third one of the triad of what we used to call the warlords in Afghanistan, makes a deal with the Taliban, hands over Mazar-i-Sharif, plus all the weapon storages. So then finally, the governor of Jalalabad says, well, if I'm the only one standing, I'm not going to die. Hands over Jalalabad, and at the same time, Ashraf Ghani makes a deal with the Taliban to leave Kabul with his family and some close friends unscathed. So what you see here is that this rapid takeover, if you look at the size of the country and the days, just 2 weeks in which all of this plays out, 9 days in total, from fighting to finish, it is impossible that a fighting force of the Taliban with less than 100,000 individual fighters would be able to be in all of these places from north to east to west to south Afghanistan at the same time with overwhelming force. The army did fight until two things happened. They were ordered no longer to fight, and until they saw that the real hardest Taliban opponents made deal with the Taliban. So if I'm an officer in the Afghan army and I see that these guys are making deals to get out, why wouldn't I need now to lay down my life for a fight that I can no longer win because the leadership is already gone? So these personal deals were really the reason why it fell down so quickly. The Taliban, of course, are emboldened, and the local stakeholders are now heading for the door en masse. Now, why should we care that the Taliban are back in Afghanistan? Of course, you know, the Taliban, first and foremost, are a big problem for the Afghan population, as we all know. And we can discuss later whether they're 1.0 or 2.0. I don't really think that if you appoint the same people to the same position that they had in before 2001, which is what happened, that you can, and they say they have the same ideology then that they had prior to 2001, you can experience any kind of significantly different behavior. Clearly, what they have learned is how to say wonderful things in English, which means something completely different in our interpretation of the terms of inclusivity, women's education, free media, than it does for the Taliban. So why do we care? Because of the symbiotic relationship of the Taliban and al-Qaeda. And just here, this is the Taliban, the al-Qaeda affiliates that are already inside the country operating for a couple of years. So al-Qaeda core, Zawahiri and friends, and there was a very annoying video of the security chief of Osama bin Laden returning to Afghanistan on camera, and the Taliban cleared the roads for him. So clearly the top leadership of al-Qaeda feels now that Afghanistan is a safe space for them. Then there's al-Qaeda in the Indian subcontinent, the Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, Jaish-e-Mohammed, so a whole list of al-Qaeda affiliates that are already with fighters inside Afghanistan, and they are everywhere. So I very graciously limited these blobs so I don't have to make one big right circle around the country, but there's really no region of the country where al-Qaeda is not operating at the moment. And the main conduit of the Taliban, so obviously the Taliban are not a unified movement. There are southern Talibanis around Kandahar, there are eastern Talibanis around the Haqqani network, there are northern Taliban. All of them are not 100% streamlined, but the main conduit towards al-Qaeda was, is, and will always be the Haqqani movement, which now incidentally, has 3 ministries in the government, including the Interior Ministry, and as you famously know, not only sanctioned by the UN, but also by the US, including rewards for justice money. And they operate exactly in eastern Afghanistan. That's where the Taliban are most Salafist. You always hear that the Taliban are Hanafi, a more moderate, more nationalistic form of extremist Islam. That is true. The majority are, but not the Haqqanis. The Haqqanis are the only part of the Taliban that have very strong relationship into the Wahhabist and Salafi community in the Gulf. and were always the go-in between these more nationalistic extremists of around Mullah Omar or now Haibatullah, and the more globally oriented al-Qaeda guys. And very fundamentally, it's important to understand that while the Taliban are maybe correct by saying we only have plans for Afghanistan, they still feel themselves as part of a global jihadi movement. And they are only linked to that movement because they are not going to, very likely not going to organize attacks in Germany or the US by themselves, but they're linked to that movement is al-Qaeda. That's why there's always been this symbiotic relationship. That's why they, for last 20 years, have refused to officially separate from al-Qaeda. I always thought this was the easiest thing for the international community to get from the Taliban, is they cost you your regime in 2001. They really weren't helping you in a strategic manner with money or any kind of training that was strategically important the last 20 years. Why are you not just simply saying, we no longer support al-Qaeda, leave our country? It would be easy, but no, they didn't. And they didn't do this in 2001. They didn't do this in the last 20 years when we asked them to do, and they are very unlikely to do this now. So this is a new safe space for al-Qaeda. Ask Amir ul-Haq, the security chief of UBL. He's already made that determination and made it on camera. And then, of course, you have this terrorist opposition. This is the only really viable opposition in the country, unfortunately, but that's not good news at all. So here is where the bases are, but please don't confuse this little green circle with any way representing the threat. But this in northern Nangarhar is where the last couple of bases are for ISIS-K, but they have cells all over the country and have demonstrated with the attack on the Kabul airport on the 26th of August and several attacks, including a couple of hours ago in eastern Afghanistan, that they're always willing to strike. And the real problem is, now that the Taliban are taking over power and slowly going to the reins of power, even within the Taliban, they're going to be losers and they're going to be winners. And the losers are definitely now having an even more radical place where they can go in order to express their opposition to the new regime, and that is ISIS-K. Now, they're not going to go to the National Resistance Front, made up of what they believe, unbelieving heretics. They are going to ISIS-K, and ISIS-K is the Afghan-Pakistan branch of the Islamic State. Make no mistake, they're not confined to Afghanistan. At the moment, as we speak, in Düsseldorf, Germany, a group of Tajiks is in front of a German court, and they say, not the prosecutor, they say that ISIS-K instructed them, supported them, and encouraged them to conduct attacks on American bases in Germany in 2019. So it has already started before that. Now, let me very quickly come to the relationship between Iran and the Taliban. I think this is very well known. Before 2001, there was a very contentious relationship. This is the pictures of the 8 Iranian diplomats and the IRNA correspondent that was executed by Taliban forces, Pakistanis under Taliban command in Mazar-Sharif in 1998. There was nearly a war. There was a large-scale prosecution of the Hazara community in Afghanistan, massive flow of drugs, because this is another issue we can discuss maybe in the question. There's never been Taliban without drugs. They were pre-financed by drug dealers, and they've been financed by drugs ever since. And COVID support for the Northern Alliance. Now, in the phase 2 between 2001 and 2021, they obviously saw there is a very convenient relationship to be had, the ability to hurt US and international troops on the ground without having to do it themselves. So they provided arms, and here's just one picture of the State Department of the arms supported provided to Taliban factions. But there was always instantaneously infighting about the Iran relationship within the Taliban. So the Taliban really weren't all of that happy with that relationship. These rumors about the Mashhad Shura, just before the death of Mullah Mansour in 2016, was actually used to oust some of the Taliban commanders that were seen as being too close to Iran. So it was always a complicated relationship, but based on a mutual interest to hurt the United States and its interests in the region. At the same time, of course, they tried to build a relationship with the government in Kabul. Both Karzai and Ghani famously got money, lots of money from them. For really, the only reason was they needed access to the Afghan economy because the Europeans, the Americans had just imposed economic sanctions, and then we imposed economic sanctions on them. And this was one way to get your hands on hard dollars. So there was a sanctions evasion reason as well why they wanted to have this kind of relationship. Now, the big question is what happens now? As you can see, this was the Taliban delegation that was accepted to Tehran earlier this year in January. So they already saw the writing on the wall earlier than many in the West. But there's still no clear statement about the recognition, because now a lot of the common interests are gone. There's no longer any US troops to hurt in Afghanistan. So, why would you need the Taliban to do that now? There is still a commonality on a general hatred of the United States, but the jury is still out in Tehran on whether or not the Taliban are going to create more problems or more solutions for the Iranians. There were triumphant statements about the withdrawal of Iran, of the United States, and the way it was done. Obviously, that emboldens Iran. But whether or not the Taliban are going to be useful relationship, that is not yet clear. Especially also no access to dollars. I mean, there's no real liquidity inflow into into Afghanistan at this moment. And I would say, as they did prior to 2001, Iranians don't see these relationships as strongly. There are a few groups like Hezbollah, where the Iranians really do see a large-scale long-term investment opportunity and will, in an all-weather relationship, as the Chinese always say about their relationship with Pakistan, do whatever it takes to keep their relationship with the group. With the Taliban, this is not, I don't see at this point, the same here. They can turn at any time against the Taliban. At the moment, there's just simply no outlet where they could turn to. Prior to 2001, they supported the Northern Alliance. Now, I just want to point out, because the Taliban wanted to be recognized as the government of Afghanistan, that would be a fundamental mistake by the UN, by the US, or by the Europeans to do so. The Taliban are harboring al-Qaeda, and we've destroyed entire governments for far less than that. There are currently 2 United Nations sanctions regimes that are targeting Afghanistan. 1267, 12 individuals and 20 entities are on that list as operating in Afghanistan. And 1988, which was built to target specifically the Taliban in 2011, that still exists. Why is this important to maintain? Number one, you have control over funds flowing into Afghanistan, including if the Chinese or the Russians would ever think about investment. And because the Taliban actually cared. Al-Qaeda, the Islamic State, just didn't care about economic sanctions as a non-state actor. The Taliban from the beginning, this is from the Taliban website until it went down a couple of weeks ago, and it was up there the entire time the website existed. They cared because they know they need some minimum amount of international recognition if ever their dreams of Chinese investment or Pakistani massive monetary support should materialize. So we need those sanctions as a negotiation leverage. Problem, of course, is the Security Council consensus here. You've seen China more than Russia, who does one military exercise after the other since the takeover of the Taliban in Central Asia, to make sure that the border to Central Asia remains airtight, are toying with how they want to do this. And as 2 permanent members, they can do a lot of disruption in the Security Council. Okay, so this finishes my scene setting presentation for the beginning, and I'm very much looking forward to the discussion later.
Thank you, Hans. I appreciate it. As always, incredibly detailed and knowledgeable and incredibly thoughtful. Next up is my great friend, Fran Townsend. When I said that this is sort of the dream team of experts, Fran certainly fits that bill. She comes from this policy from a couple different perspectives. She was a long-standing assistant U.S. attorney, Justice Department official across multiple organizations. And then I don't know what she did to deserve but to become the Homeland Security advisor under President Bush during in the post 9/11 years, setting up these apparatuses that we dealt with all of these threats. I can go on about all of her different service, but she really is the person that any blue chip board, whether it be journalistic, not-for-profit, or business, turn to because of her incredible knowledge, expertise, and her wisdom. I'll just, before I turn it over to you, Fran, I've been in the room with Fran and world leaders many times. And Fran is always quiet until the end. And then she says something. And that's when every world leader will turn to Fran and listen, because when Fran Townsend talks about this stuff, everyone listens, and everyone should listen, because her expertise is renowned and her voice is incredibly thoughtful. And she's a true expert and a great friend. So Fran, take it away.
Mark, thank you for that. And thank you for that very kind introduction. It's my pleasure to be here today and to have the chance to hear from so many distinguished experts, and as Mark says, friends on these complex and frankly interlocking issues. It's been a difficult time for me as a former Homeland Security and national security official to roll over in my mind the disastrous scenario of America's withdrawal from Afghanistan. Was it wise to expect the Taliban, which harbored al-Qaeda terrorists from before 9/11, to carry out their side of a peace agreement without enforcement mechanisms? The notion of a Taliban resurgence and a Taliban 20 years after 9/11 being permitted without challenge to rule Afghanistan again, to me was unthinkable. And frankly, my thoughts are with Gold Star mothers who lost sons in Afghanistan. Watching this has got to be heartbreaking. Was it advisable, witnessing their non-compliance, to withdraw close air support for the Afghan military, who, by the way, lost 66,000 troops during the war, enabling the Taliban to sweep across Afghanistan like a wildfire and putting so many Americans and our Afghan allies at risk during a very forced and chaotic exit? These questions will need to be confronted, of course, but now our task is to look ahead and discuss the implications of the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan for the US and the Islamic Republic of Iran. Based on my experience, the US withdrawal from Afghanistan is a huge loss for the US counterterrorism intelligence capabilities, a public relations boon for worldwide jihadist groups, and an overall win for Iran that could ironically make it less likely that negotiations to prevent Iran from building a nuclear weapon will be fruitful. When we entered Afghanistan, our goals included destroying al-Qaeda's grip on Afghanistan by driving the Taliban from power, disrupting al-Qaeda's global operations and terrorist financing networks, and destroying al-Qaeda's terrorist training camps, and helping the Afghans, especially women, recover from the Taliban's reign of terror. Going on the offensive against terrorist groups and those who would shield them was the right strategy. The Taliban were driven from power, al-Qaeda was put on the run and severely weakened, Osama bin Laden and many other central figures in al-Qaeda were put on the run or severely weakened. The intelligence we gleaned from captured al-Qaeda was key to preventing additional attacks against the US and our allies. And Afghans, especially women, could enjoy some basic freedoms. I couldn't help in the last several weeks to think of a visit I made to Afghanistan and the women who were on the National Counter-Narcotics Force. They were so happy to see me, and I asked them why. For them, it was an incredible opportunity to see a woman, as they would say, with a seat at the table. And they hoped that their serving in the National Counter-Narcotics Force was the first step in a journey to having a woman in a national security policy position. Based on what we've seen in the Taliban's takeover, that they will never see a seat at the table as long as the Taliban rules Afghanistan. And despite the Taliban's charm offensive since taking power, I'm afraid not much has changed operationally. The Taliban's first act after declaring the end of the war was announcing Khalil al-Rahman Haqqani of the notoriously brutal Haqqani network. He would be in charge of security in Kabul. The Haqqani network has close ties with foreign jihadist groups, including a years-long association with al-Qaeda. The US Department of Treasury designated Khalil Rahman Haqqani a global terrorist in February of 2011. Al-Rahman's nephew, the leader of the Haqqani network, Sirajuddin, is wanted by the US State Department for planning a 2008 attack on a hotel in Kabul that killed 6 people. including an American citizen. In all, of the 33-member cabinet named by the Taliban, 19 are designated terrorists. And I have to just say, putting the Haqqani network in charge of security is like putting the proverbial fox in the hen house. It's a joke. Just last week, Afghanistan's new Taliban rulers set up a ministry for the propagation of virtue and the prevention of vice in the building that once housed the Women's Affairs Ministry. In June 2021, a UN report warned a significant part of the leadership of al-Qaeda resides in the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. Ties between the two groups remain close, based on ideological alignment, relationships forged through common struggle and intermarriage. However, the Biden administration has vowed to keep such threats at bay from, quote, over the horizon, end quote, by monitoring the situation and deploying drones out of US bases in Qatar and other Gulf countries. Quote, we will maintain the fight against terrorism in Afghanistan and other countries, Biden said in his remarks on ending the war in Afghanistan. We just don't need to fight a ground war to do it. To ISIS-K, we aren't done with you yet, said the president. Nonetheless, the dismantling of the military infrastructure, the withdrawal of all US personnel, and the absence of human intelligence from Afghanistan will make watching the Taliban, al-Qaeda, ISIS, and the 570-mile border between Afghanistan and Iran that much more difficult. Some intelligence experts have labeled the strategy, quote, over the rainbow. It is more than 1,200 miles from Qatar to Kabul, which gives you a sense of how difficult the military mission has now become. Worldwide jihadist groups in Iran and its proxies like Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Shiite militias in Iraq and Syria have cheered the US withdrawal and used it to intensify their propaganda and their recruiting. In June, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula released its first English language copy of its Inspire magazine in over 4 years. Iran's longstanding relationship with al-Qaeda makes it even more likely that the group will be making a comeback in this new Afghanistan. Iran's somewhat unexpected relationship with al-Qaeda began in the early 1990s in Sudan, based on the desire to strike the United States. Iranian logistical and explosives training was critical to al-Qaeda's attacks at the US embassies in Africa and the attack on the USS Cole. Iran has even harbored al-Qaeda operatives in Iranian territory and helped transit money, weapons, and fighters. In terms of bilateral relations, Iran will overlook the Taliban's past brutality against the Shiite minority and tried to sell Afghanistan petroleum products to further weaken America's maximum pressure campaign, designed to induce Iranian leaders to negotiate a stronger nuclear agreement, something the Biden administration has prioritized since taking office. Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Hezbollah, Iran, and others are cheering the US government's decision to abandon Afghanistan. Our allies are perplexed and angry by our embarrassing lack of planning and consultation. I fear that our weakened intelligence capability leaves America vulnerable to an emboldened threat from groups whose hate for America is boundless. Mark, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Fran. I appreciate your remarks, and thank you for everything you've done for our country and you continue to do for our country. Carrying forward the dream team, and we can't even talk about, I'm supposed to introduce my friend Norm Rule, and I can't even talk about all the things that Norm has done because, you know, I talked about all the things that Hans has done and Fran has done, but I really have to talk about the things Norm has done. Suffice to say that Norm was in the intelligence community for, what is it, 800 years, Norman, I think is what it was, and was really the leading voice and the Iran expert. He had very, very prominent positions in the intelligence community for so long, and he's, like everyone else on this panel, a true hero in the sense that he served our country and the international community so well. I teased Norm that since he has come out of the shadows, it's like a volcano erupting, with his wisdom and his thoughts and his analysis. And we've all benefited from that volcano erupting. And I really look forward to hearing what he has to say on this panel, because combining him with, on a panel with Hans, Fran, and Radek is a potent juju, as they say. So Norman, Director of Volcanic Eruptions, if you would please, to this panel, I would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for being on it, my friend.
Good morning, Mark, and thank you for the overly generous statements. It's a pleasure to be with such an august group today, and to have heard such luminaries as Fran Townsend and Hans, who have so much to say on this issue and so much wisdom to provide, as well as the senator, who is always a voice of reason. I think it's fair to say that the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan and the decision and the way the withdrawal occurred provided an unprecedented and completely unexpected diplomatic and propaganda windfall to Iran and its proxies, which not only had immediate benefits, but will have benefits that will play out in months and years to come. Iran and its proxies immediately joining China and Russia put out a propaganda campaign stating that the United States and its partners were unreliable, whereas Iran stands with its allies, such as the war criminal Bashar al-Assad, in an unrelenting fashion. Iran's propaganda has also stated that the Taliban victory shows that a small group of militants can defeat a superpower. And this will bolster proxy morale throughout the region. And as Fran as wisely stated, ISIS and al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula has already seized upon this. And it will make it less likely that Iran will see compromise for its proxy voice within Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. Iran is also claiming that this is evidence that supports its longtime claims that the West won't assist you when your defense is on the line. We'll abandon those people who put their lives on the line to defend shared values, and that the United States in particular brings chaos to the region. Since the withdrawal, Iran has put forward the message that it is better to accommodate Iran in the region, better to deal with Iran in the region. And we see a variety of talks that take place between regional actors, although it's fair to say that these talks have produced nothing. Thus far, Iran has no reason to make concessions and is just seeking concessions. I think moving forward, we're going to watch Iran use this event as a lever against the West. It will use this both in terms of increasing its recalcitrance to compromise with the United States and the P5+1 in the nuclear deal, but also to offer the lure that perhaps Iran might be able to moderate the Taliban. I don't believe that's the case. I think Fran and Hans and the senator would agree that's not possible. But nonetheless, I think they'll offer this through their influence with some Taliban elements, as well as their ability to decide the fate of the al-Qaeda leadership and facilitation elements which are operating in Iran. For Iran, this provides de jure and de facto recognition by the international community of a government which Fran has correctly stated includes some of the people with the least association with Western values since the Islamic Revolution. Multiple actors who are soaked in blood and violence against the Iranian people in the region. I think Iran will also use this to try and develop a regional voice, not only with Gulf partners, but also to develop a new quad of sorts, working with Pakistan, Russia, and China to develop a new security combine. And we've seen discussions at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization to initiate that very action. So going forward, Iran's got some significant priorities, and I think we're going to watch Iran's behavior match these priorities. As Fran stated, they have a 572-mile border with Afghanistan, and Iran cannot risk a failed state on its border, and it needs to be wary of what a hardline Sunni state, which has no internal opposition, would bring. At the very least, that would mean a flood of refugees, and Iran already has approximately 2.8 million Afghan refugees. I think we're going to see a robust effort by the Quds Force and the Revolutionary Guards to deal with this, as well as Iran's foreign ministry and other elements. And we're likely to see some of Iran's Afghan proxies from Syria, the Fatah-Mayun, brought back to play in this area. Iran will seek protection for its diplomats, which, as Hans correctly stated, a number of them were killed in 1998. And Iran currently maintains not only its embassy, but consulates in Jalalabad, Herat, Kandahar, and Mazar-e Sharif. Iran will work to provide some protection for Afghans Hazara. They are the third largest minority in Afghanistan, about 900,000 people, but it really has minimal influence there, and I think that will be a challenge. Iran will also attempt to protect its trade. For Iran, this is important. This is under the Afghan government, it was about $3 to $4 billion a year. Now that's going to decline precipitously in the near term, but Iran is going to do what it can to protect that, to include trying to push for Western aid to the Taliban to sustain that. Afghanistan provides only $40 to $50 million of exports to Iran, so it's not a big a deal for the Afghan government. And of course, Iran will seek to contain narcotics trafficking. So in the immediate term, if you're in Tehran, the Supreme Leader is giving out instructions after a Supreme Council for National Security meeting, what will be their next moves? First, to maintain and expand their nascent influence with the elements of the Taliban who are now in power, as well as provincial contacts. Second, they will try to prevent any flood of new refugees into the country. And they've set up 3 temporary refugee camps, and they'll probably seek international aid for this effort. They'll try to start talks on economy and trade, and perhaps water talks down the line. And of course, they've already reinstituted fuel supplies to Afghanistan. They will also use Afghanistan to build their regional and international influence. Iran loves to go to multilateral conferences where it can play with major powers. Last, I think Iran is going to have to decide how to handle its relationship with al-Qaeda. So the wild cards, what do I worry about? I think there are a number of regional issues that are going to be important for the Gulf states and for other actors. I think there are a number of economic issues that are going to be important, the fate of Chabahar, what role China eventually plays. I think these are down the line, and Iran will be in a wait and see mode. To me, the most important issue that we should focus on now is how to prevent Iran from facilitating a reestablishment of al-Qaeda operational activity in Afghanistan. We should recall that after the fall of the Taliban and the fall of the al-Qaeda camps at Kandahar and Durinta, thousands, literally thousands of al-Qaeda operatives streamed through Iran with Iran's knowledge and were allowed to disseminate themselves, propagate themselves throughout the world. I cannot think of a single incident in the war on terror that was more critical to putting militants, trained militants throughout the world than that. Right now, Iran has the capacity to release Saif al-Adil and to maintain the facilitation node that U.S. intelligence has talked about in unclassified reports every year for many years. What happens there could lead to a direct threat against the homeland and the loss of American and other lives. Mark, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot more today. Back to you.
Thank you, Norm, and your points are obviously incredibly well taken, and thank you for all your service. And it's a real reminder already, Iran has been designated the #1 state sponsor of terrorism, and there's been a reason for that. And it's always been as effusively described as it has been in the last few years, and as you're hearing today. It's my pleasure now to introduce my friend Radek Sikorsky. Radek wasn't on before, and Radek, I was describing, he had arrived a little bit late. We have time zone issues. Thank you for joining, Radek. But I describe this group, Radek, as really an almost dream team of experts. And in some ways, it means you all, and we've all been around for a while, because in some ways, it's back to the future in many ways when it comes to dealing with these issues. And when it comes to my friend Radek Sikorsky, there really is no one that has greater experience in government in the European side, on the thought leadership side, and on the journalistic side. Radek started really as a war correspondent and somebody that covered these great issues as a journalist, went into government, had many incredible positions in the Polish government, and was a real leader, from National Minister of Defense to the former foreign minister. And he continues to be an incredible and leading voice on this subject matter. And there really isn't anybody that knows more than Radek on these issues. And Radek's voice is always thoughtful, considered, and people listen when Radek talks. So Radek, welcome to the what I'm calling almost a dream team panel. So and it's quite appropriate that you're batting cleanup here on this panel. So welcome.
Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the invitation. And I'd just like to state my credentials further by saying that I did cover the Afghan war in the 1980s. I spent 6 weeks at Tora Bora when it was our base against the Soviets. And I brought out the first pictures of Stinger missiles on the battlefield in 1986. Which I think the agency was not happy about, but it boosted morale among the Mujahideen.
Radek, I didn't highlight that because I didn't want to date you further. I was appealing to your vanity that I didn't want to say that you went back that far.
No, but the reason I mention it is that I remember what Afghanistan was like in the 1980s, traveling with the resistance in the countryside. It was a completely pre-modern society. It was completely medieval. You know, when I arrived at these Afghan villages and they learned that I was Polish, they would ask me things like, how many valleys away is that? Their values, their way of life was by the motions of the sun, by the Pashtunwali and by the Quran. So a generation ago, Afghanistan was a feudal society. And we tried to modernize, first the Soviets, and then we tried to modernize it at a much faster pace than our societies modernized. And I'll come back to that. I was also on the outskirts of Kabul on the 15th of February, 1989, with Mullah Azad, watching the Soviets withdraw. And, you know, the Soviets withdrew with flags flying. General Gromov crossed the Friendship Bridge into Tajikistan, and the communist regime survived in Kabul for another 3 years and only collapsed in March '92 after the Soviet Union itself collapsed. So let's be clear that the way that America withdrew was more chaotic and more humiliating than the Soviet withdrawal. I mean, that war contributed to the collapse of the Soviet Union itself. America is not going to collapse, but in terms of managing a post-war situation, the Russians were more successful. I only have one footnote to add to what was said before, namely the question of recognition. As a former foreign minister, I'll just say that we don't recognize governments. We recognize states. And in Europe in particular, that's a prerogative of member states. The EU does not recognize either governments or states. And we will deal with whoever is in charge in Kabul because there are humanitarian and other issues that require collaboration. The Taliban, as has already been said, were created by Pakistan's ISI in mid-1990s. When we went into Afghanistan in 2001, we should have kept in front of our eyes the negative interests that we actually have in Afghanistan. Namely, we don't want Afghanistan to be a source of terrorists, drugs, and refugees. All these stories about Afghanistan's mineral wealth, sorry, I don't buy it. There's mineral wealth almost anywhere. But to get it out, you need a decade or two of physical and legal stability. And Afghanistan has never been able to provide that. So the wealth is not going to be extracted unless you occupy the country again. And my theory is that the very successful US ouster of the Taliban was a little too easy. the CIA teams together with the Northern Alliance were able to bring the Taliban in a matter of 6 weeks, which meant that America switched its attention to Iraq. And Taliban in Afghanistan was regarded as the good war and a successful operation, and it wasn't quite. And I then visited Afghanistan both as defense minister and as foreign minister, and I have to tell you, I was appalled by what we were doing there. We were creating these NATO cities on the outskirts of major Afghan towns that were spending 99% of their resources on defending themselves. And we were creating the Afghan infrastructure at 10, 20, 30 times the normal cost. And at the same time, we were setting ourselves impossible targets. I remember these surreal discussions at NATO and the EU about whether the new Afghan family code was conforming to the Dutch and Danish standards of protection of minorities and of women's rights. We were importing a social revolution into a country that had barely begun its journey towards modernity. This could not have worked, and we have now created a generation of Afghans whose hopes have been dashed. We created the illusion of stability and the illusion of prospects. I was also appalled by the manner of US withdrawal. I don't understand why before our footprint was too wide and now it suddenly had to go to zero. The US is militarily present in half the countries of the globe. Why should Afghanistan be among the half where the US is at zero? There is Bagram Air Base, a key place which locks the logistics between north and south of Afghanistan, where the US invested hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. It could have been defended with 2,000 or 3,000 troops, maybe not even all of them American, and that would have put a check on the Taliban. It could have been defended even in the face of their hostility, and I don't understand why it wasn't done. When I was in Washington in July, I was told everybody was in favor of it, except the person that was actually taking the decisions. What we see in Europe, this decision and the manner that it was taken, we see in Europe as a shortening of the front in all kinds of ways by the United States to put all of its resources, political, economic and military, towards its rivalry with China. Even the US withdrew its embassy from Kabul, didn't need to do that, but did. We take that as a sign to the Russians and to the Chinese, your problem now, deal with it. We are out. We are no longer interested. And let me just conclude by saying that I have very low expectations of this Taliban team. Their charm offensive should not be trusted. They have not fought us for 20 years in order now to be guardians of a liberal order. They are religious fanatics and they'll do what religious fanatics do. I would only add a little remark to the relationship with Iran. The host of my main trip to Afghanistan in the 80s was Ismail Khan, the Amir of the northwestern provinces and the last of the great commanders of the jihad against the Soviet Union. He tried to defend Herat, wasn't able to. The Taliban allowed him to go into exile in Iran. So there's clearly some kind of relationship there. The consequences in Europe will be that of the US withdrawal will be to strengthen the arguments for a more serious European defense. And that might be a good thing. Thank you.